Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Ariana and I'll be the host of this month's chat. These webinars are really an opportunity for the CSO community to come together to explore ideas with each other and discuss how to share these ideas with the greater community. As we enter Christmas week, we're seeing this webinar as an opportunity to really explore what Christmas means to us and how we can celebrate the power of Jesus' word year-round. We'll discuss the impact Jesus' message is having on the world today, and also discuss how we can play a role in sharing this unique message with those around us. So I'm joined tonight by others on the CSO support team. We have Chris, who coordinates CSO support in the US for TMC Youth, and he's joining us from Seattle. And we also have three of our college reps. We have Katie from the College of William & Mary. We have Camille from Oregon State University, and then also Grace from Auburn University. And then also we have Christian Science lecturer Laurie Snorik Yates with us, who is a university professor before she went into the full-time practice. So the topic of Christmas can seem like a really obvious choice to focus on at this time of year, but it's also really easy to get distracted from the real magnitude of the event that this holiday is celebrating. Our focus so easily gets pulled to Santa Claus, presents, vacation time. So today we're going to spend some time really honing in and getting clearer on what this event means to the world today. On one level, it's celebrating the birth of the personal Jesus, but it's also the world's introduction to the concept of the Christ, bringing a radically different understanding of God, of the spiritual identity of man, and of the close relationship that we have, that each one of us has with the divine. We're going to discuss what this means to each one of us in our own words and in our own lives. Those of you who are listening in can join the discussion via the chat roll. You can share your ideas and questions there, and we'll try and work them into tonight's discussion. So we're going to have Laurie kick off the discussion and really set the tone metaphysically for us. Laurie?
Thanks, Ari. I'm so happy to be a part of this webinar. It just seems to me that the work that you all are doing in your CSOs is a great reflection of the generosity of Christmas, that you all are working hard on your campuses to share that message of the Christ, regularly. And so I'm just so glad to be a part of that great work that you're doing. Ariana mentioned that our talk today is going to focus on the power of Jesus' message and how we can apply it to life today. And as I was thinking about it, a key idea for me about this topic is the way that Jesus was able to get his message across without any sense of personality getting in the way. He was so focused on the Christ as his only power that materiality or worldliness or human pride or self-will, they just weren't present at all in the work that Jesus was doing. And I think that's a great example for us today at this Christmas season. He didn't have a sense of material or corporeal selfhood. He was just totally clear on his sense of ideahood. And as I was thinking about this and about what Jesus taught us, I was also thinking about this season called Advent, the weeks leading up to the Christmas day, and just sort of what that means. And I was especially thinking about it because when we think about the Christ spirit that Jesus brought, it wasn't a seasonal thing. It wasn't something that just arrived at a certain time of year. It's this the divine ever presence that is a timeless awakening to the fathering and mothering presence of God for each of us. So as I was thinking about this and thinking about the timelessness of Christ, but then also the specialness of the Christmas time, a friend of mine told me that in Germany, the word Advent, or the season of Advent, means peacefulness, that they spend time doing quiet crafts or cooking or just quiet things at home, and that it really represents a time of peacefulness. And isn't that a great characterization of how this period can be for us? To me, a lot of what peacefulness means is really having our thoughts completely off of a self-focus. It means being totally conscious of God's love and God's love for us especially. It shakes us out of that sort of mundane dream of materiality into a whole different reality of existence that's totally spiritual and that's full of joy and that's really sort of deeply gratifying rather than just sort of temporarily pleasurable. We all know how easy it is at this time of year to get caught up and define this time of year by the shopping and the planning and the buying and the event going. And for me, the downside of all of that is really that it puts us into this kind of Christmas survival mode. And I find that anytime we go into survival mode, it really denies that we have a heart for humanity. And isn't that really the message that Jesus came to teach us? That we each have that heart for humanity because God brought it to us. God gave it to us in creating us as his idea. And especially for people who, may not find Christmas such a happy time, it can be a way of just escaping to try to survive the season. But, as we said that we're most at peace when our thoughts are off of ourselves, this is what the Christ does for us. It moves us out of just surviving something or just getting through something or just checking off our to-do list, and it really expands our thought beyond ourselves into something much bigger and much higher. I think about those shepherds in the field looking at the star to guide their way and how expansive their thinking must have been at that moment as they changed their plans to go look at a little baby in a manger somewhere. I think about the stillness that must have characterized that moment for those shepherds and how that's the same stillness that can characterize this time for us, the next week or the next couple of weeks, and all year long as well. That the Christ is what gives us a life characterized by stillness and reflection rather than by frenzy. Last Christmas was a really powerful example of this for me. In the middle of all of the preparations and all of the planning, I found myself unable to move without extreme pain in my neck and shoulders. It got to the point where I was in bed basically the whole time during Christmas and not able to do anything. And it taught me some really profound things about the true meaning of Christmas. First of all, it taught me that there is no human doing. That all the things that I felt like I had been doing, running around and planning and making things perfect for my family who was coming, that I never had done a thing without God. Jesus taught us about the inseparability of God and man. He said, "My Father works and I work. My Father is in me and I am in him." And that's the same for us, that we don't do a thing in our lives without the rhythm of life in spirit moving us. And I realized that my activity wasn't through the vehicle of a human body, but it was just responding to that one spirit that comes directly from God, and that's the Christ power. The second thing I realized, and this was part of when the healing came for me, was when I just wholeheartedly surrendered to the unity of God and man. I felt this great sense of oneness and stillness just come over me as I was thinking about it. And I stopped wondering when it would be healed or how long I would be in bed or what I was missing out on with my family as I was lying up in bed. And I just felt a really conscious awareness of that light of Christ completely surrounding me. And I realized that that was God's love for each of us. So finally, the third thing I really learned was just that love of the Christ, that love of God, is the only love there is. That this love overflows from God to us and then to others. And we aren't the source of the love for our family members or our friends, just like they aren't the source of the love for us. There's only one love. Others can be a reminder for us of God's love, but they're still never the source of it. And so the love in our lives isn't dependent on a person or any one experience. And we can't be hypnotized into agreeing to live without love. that God intends for us to know his love and to feel it tangibly. And as I was experiencing and feeling that love there in my bed last Christmas, it just became so clear to me that that was my Christmas gift, was those ideas from God. And even if that meant I couldn't be down at the table for Christmas dinner that particular day, that those lessons that I learned were ones that lasted the whole year for me and are still really powerful in my life. And that's really the timeless message of the Christ that comes to us and lasts beyond the beautiful dinner or the present unwrapping or the times that we get together with others. So remember how we said earlier that the Christ gave Jesus the power to know that he was an idea, to have a sense of ideahood rather than corporeal selfhood? Well, a divine idea, I realized, doesn't get overburdened. It doesn't get caught up in materialism. It doesn't rush around trying to accomplish a lot of things. A divine idea responds perfectly to the rhythm of life and spirit. And that is the promise for each one of us this Christmas season, that we can feel that rhythm of spirit moving us, and that we can feel that unity with God that shows us that we don't do anything this Christmas season or any day without God moving us. That's what that healing taught me, and I found that true freedom was so much more of a gift than anything material I could have gotten for Christmas last year. It also taught me that true joy comes in really knowing ourselves as that idea of God, that we're held forever in the embrace of love, so that we are free to love others, whether or not we think they deserve it. So I'll just close now and pass it on to the rest of you, but I just want to share one of my favorite ideas from Mary Baker Eddy's writings on Christmas. She said, "Christmas to me is the reminder of God's great gift, his spiritual idea, man and the universe." She also said that we celebrate the birth of truth, the dawn of divine love breaking upon the gloom of matter and evil, with the glory of infinite being. So my wish for all of us this Christmas is that we can feel that glory of infinite being and just go forward expressing it in all of our lives. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurie, for sharing those ideas with us. And I'm just going to turn it over to the CSO reps. And Chris, if you want to jump in and just, you all can just share a little bit about how you've been thinking about Christmas and really what it means to you all. Camille, I'll have you start.
Okay. Well, when I was praying about this, about basically about what the Christ means to me, I was thinking a lot about how I feel like most of my sorry, let me gather my thoughts here. Basically that when any problem that I have in my life is when I realize that it's not a problem, that's when the healing happens. That in reality there is no problem. And that what brings that sense to me is the feeling of God's personal love for me. That divine love is always supporting and caring for me and is always supporting and caring for everybody. And that if I am so incredibly loved, there is no problem. There's never actually a problem. So to me, the Christ idea is like, well, you have God's love. God's love is universal, and God's love is personal. And to me, the Christ idea is that, or the Christ is that sense of personal love that lifts us out of ourselves, like Laurie was talking about a second ago, And so once we feel loved, once we know that we are loved, then we can help other people see that they're loved. And it's hard to do that if we feel like we're not loved. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Grace?
So just in my relationships with my friends and like when we discuss like Jesus and Christ, um, I feel like sometimes they get caught up on the like material presence of Jesus and how sometimes they'll tell me they're like Jesus was the only one that could do God's work, like healing work. And like in Christian Science, we learn that all of us, like everyone, can embody Christ. And like Camille was saying, with like Christ being like the individual like love God has for us. And so like sometimes they'll be like, well, Jesus was God, and it clearly states in the story when the angel of Gabriel came down to speak to Mary and tell her she was going to have Jesus, that he would be the Son of the Highest, and that is always what I go back to whenever they say that Jesus is God, and that he was the only one to be able to do healing through the Christ.
Excellent, thanks for sharing that. And Katie?
Thanks, Grace. So one of the things I was talking to my dad about earlier today, Mary Bigaretti says that we are all capable of doing more than we think we are capable of. I think it's not, we are all capable of more than we do. And I was thinking about that in terms of the title of this webinar, which is Christ Transforming Message of Freedom, and how, you know, that gives us the freedom. We are all capable of more than we do. That gives us the freedom to pursue anything that we feel divinely guided to pursue with the support of God. And I think about it in terms of Jesus and how he never questioned for a moment if he was capable of doing something. He immediately knew that he was capable of more than what anyone expected him to do, more than what anyone had ever done before him. And kind of using that example of Christ whenever we start to doubt ourselves, what did Jesus do? He immediately took that jump. He immediately healed. He immediately followed God, and that made a lot of difference. So that's what I'm thinking about.
That's great. Just kind of riffing off of what you were sharing, Katie, I've been thinking about this sense of, you know, the coming of the Christ idea being really a wake-up call for the world. You know, it's just like everybody's kind of going through the motions, kind of thinking of, you know, reality is just as reality is materiality, and you know, Jesus' message was the opposite of that. You know, sharing with us, you know, the spiritual nature of our identity, and really showing kind of like the sense of God having such a close relationship with each one of us. And I think in some ways, though, you know, humanity is still hitting the snooze alarm on that. But you know, it's really presenting a completely different view of ourselves and our identity, and looking at it from solely a spiritual lens. And I think that's just it's so interesting. It's like kind of waking up, you know, from this dream of, you know, all there is materiality, and, you know, this belief that, you know, we're susceptible to these beliefs of disease or heredity or limitation, and you know, just looking at what he was able to overcome by healing disease, by raising the dead, by walking on water, overcoming the laws of physics themselves, and really showing that spiritual laws are really the only power, and that each one of us can tap into these laws. Just thinking about how we're continuing to wake up from that dream, and as Christian Scientists, you know, we're helping continue to share these ideas more widely, just like the early Christians did, in helping people get like a, you know, more clear sense of what that true identity of themselves. are. So, Chris,
Yeah, yeah, Ariana, thanks so much for sharing that because just gives me so much gratitude to think about the healing power of the Christ and the gratitude that I've felt it just it's come in very practical ways, and I just continue to rejoice in my heart that I've felt the healing power of the Christ. It's so clear to me that I felt this. There was a ski accident that occurred on the slopes a few years ago. I was skiing with my brother, and I literally flew off of the groomer, which is a groomed trail, onto some really bumpy snow. Hit some moguls, lost a ski, and ended up needing to dive into the snow because I was going way too fast and I was way out of control. And there were some trees in front of me, and I had to fall, which ended up twisting my knee really intensely. And I had it was a shock of fear that hit me. It was like, oh my gosh, my ski season is over right now. And that fear needed to be handled. So as my brother kind of lifted me up, and he was talking truth to me. We were sharing an insight into what we knew to be true, rather than this really devastating accident. We ended up skiing back down. I was on one ski and he was helping me out, and we got down to the chairlift, and we took the chairlift back to the bottom of the mountain. And I was working as a lift operator that winter, and so I wasn't able to go back to work that day. And I needed to make a decision then and there on that mountain side. What approach was I going to take? Was I going to go to to the ski patrol and ask for some crutches to get me going forward, or was I going to close the door and I was going to enter into the closet as Jesus instructs his followers? If you really want to get close to God, you really have to shut out the material senses. You got to close the door and enter into the closet, and you have to pray. You have to pray to know harmony, to know God. And I ended up going home, and I made the decision to pray, and so I opened up my Bible because that's immediately where I want to turn to find the Word of God, the Christ. And I opened up Acts 3, which is the first healing after Jesus' resurrection, and we have John and we have Peter going up to the temple gate, beautiful, and at that temple there is a man who is lame, who's handicapped, and the man's begging. He's saying, please, please, please help me. And you know what Peter does? He says, of course I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you what I have. And in the name of Jesus Christ, he extends his hand to this man and he says, rise up and walk. And that's the gift that Peter gave, was the clarity of the Christ. The Christ had been risen. Jesus had returned, and there was the resurrection, and Peter knew this, and this man was so touched by that healing presence of the Christ that he too rose from his handicap, and he enters that temple on his own 2 feet without any crutches. And he enters leaping and jumping and praising God, and it's such an incredible healing. Check it out, Acts 3, verses 1 through 9. So I was reading this. It was Christmas Eve of all days. I was reading this, and I was just soaking up the Spirit of the Christ, and just like, this is what it's about. This is what it means to be a Christian. And I just slept on that. I didn't participate in all of the Christmas Eve festivities. I just stuck right there with those truths. And the next day was Christmas, and I wanted to go work as a lift operator. I wanted to be out there, even though my knee was totally tweaked and it wasn't functioning well, and it was quite difficult for me to get to work, I still did it, and I got to work to shovel the snow, and that was a little too much for me. So I just stood around the lift, and we had so many people on the mountain that day that I was just being, joyful and jolly and just expressing the Christmas cheer. And I was just telling everyone as they were coming on into my lift line, I was like, Merry Christmas, have a wonderful day. And like, enjoy the lift ride, enjoy the skiing, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. And I just said that over and over and over because, I only have a few seconds with everyone when they're skiing by. And so I just kept going along with this Merry Christmas theme, and it just lifted me up out of this sorrow and pain and feeling of like I'd been handicapped, I was broken, I was kind of feeling bad for myself, but the Christmas spirit really struck a chord with me. And actually that afternoon I had been working on the top of the mountain, and I was coming back, and I was on a chairlift without skis. I was coming back down in my lift uniform, my lift operator uniform, and I just was coming down the mountain by myself, praying and singing and thinking about God. And as I was thinking, I was completely touched by the Christ. It was such a clear depiction, feeling of harmony. I mean, I just was looking out over these rolling hills and these mountains, looking at the skiers swooshing down the mountainside, seeing the activity of mind's ideas, the Christ at play, and I just felt a great sense of harmony. And being Christmas Day just made it all that much more special, and it was a wonderful present to receive right then and there on the chairlift. It was a redeeming, it was a healthful, invigorating feeling of God's love. And I put up the bar and got off the chairlift, and they didn't even slow down the chairlift. I went in full speed and I ran off that chairlift, and I was free from that handicap. And I knew it, and I ran to go get lunch, and I was so stoked that I had been healed, and my Christmas cheer of Merry Christmas only got that much more boisterous after that afternoon. I was so happy, and ended up skiing the next few days with my family, and didn't have any lingering effects of a tweaked knee. So grateful for the healing power of the Christ on that Christmas day.
That's so great. Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I love just the both healings that have been shared tonight around Christmas time, because it's just what I was thinking as I was listening to them is just, what better way of celebrating the Christmas message than actually putting these ideas into practice and demonstrating them and really seeing that healing take place. So thanks to both of you for sharing those. That's great. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, and I'll just kind of throw this question out there to everybody, and you all can jump in and share, but really how can we be cherishing and nurturing kind of the uniqueness of this message in our own lives, and also in the way that we're sharing these ideas with others, whether it's in conversations that we have with others, or the work that we do with our CSOs. One of the reasons why we decided to have this chat and just have it focused on this is some of us on the TMC team joined a webinar a couple of weeks ago. It was actually run by I think evangelical churches, and it was about connecting people who might have feel disconnected to church. And one of the pastors, I think his name was Hayden Smith, mentioned that he felt like the message of Christianity has been getting watered down. And it's been getting watered down by, not just by others, but by Christians, by the Christian world as well. And basically it's today, it's kind of, shared as, do good, feel good, God is watching kind of from a distance, sort of like Oprah in the sky, will jump in when, you need him, but he kind of keeps his distance otherwise. And that statement made me really think about, how I was thinking about Jesus' message, and kind of questioning if I really understood it, and I really understood kind of the unique impacts that Jesus and his message had in this introduction of the Christ to the world. And so it really pushed me to start thinking about this, and I just want us to maybe think a little bit and share a little bit about this. And just going off of some of the things already shared today, the sense of, just, being a Christian means do good. And often it just means, I think we present it as a way of like, just be a better human. Let's just be better humans. We're humans, we're limited, but let's just be better humans. And that's so different from actually what Jesus was saying, because if you're really starting from the perspective, that each one of us is the perfect reflection of the divine, that is such a different foundation to start from than thinking about us just as human beings trying to be better human beings. So I've been thinking a lot about that and just getting more clear about that in my life. And then also thinking about, just the perspective that his message and that he shared about the nature of God as well. And you see just this progression in thought throughout the Bible from the early Old Testament, onto the New Testament about how people perceived God. And, often in the Old Testament, God is kind of presented in a very anthropomorphic way as kind of this stern, angry father figure that gets mad and punishes people when they do bad and sometimes rewards them. And you see in some of the Old Testament just, talk of the temples and all the effort and time that went into the temples, and kind of the sense of like we have to be worthy of God. And some people are clean, some people aren't clean, and there are all these different rules about when you are clean and when you aren't clean, and who can go in the temple and who can't, and things like that, and just a sense of like we have to work so hard to be worthy of God. And Jesus comes along with this concept of Abba, calling God Abba, like this Papa, like this really close sense of this close relationship each one of us has with God. And God is, so involved in the minutia of our lives, like every single thing. God is right there with us, regardless of where we are, what's happening in our lives. We're walking, just hand in hand with God. And so that's been really interesting for me, kind of just clarifying that in my own thought, and also making sure I've been really pushing myself to make sure that when I'm sharing Christian Science or talking to others about Christian Science, that I'm presenting just that really clear idea of the nature of God, the nature of each one of us, that spiritual identity, and how we relate to God, that closeness in our lives. So if anybody else would like to share, feel free to jump in.
Well, you reminded me, Ari, of an article I read a few years ago now in the New York Times. It was an op-ed or an editorial by a really young pastor. I think he was in his 20s. And he was talking about Christianity and how there were so many efforts today to reach young people, and that there were efforts like they would have rock bands come in and they would do lots of multimedia shows, and they would have lots of discussions about sex that were, didn't really say what was right or wrong. It just kind of was sort of attractive. They would use sort of images that were kind of alluring to allure young people in. I mean, all of these things, he was going through this list of different methods to pull people into Christianity. And then he said, this is not what young people need. He said, the world gives us all of this stuff all the time. He said, what we're looking for is a deep, authentic encounter with God, with spirit, that really profoundly moves us. Not something that just kind of gets us on this high and then leaves. He said, where are the churches that are doing this? He was really kind of a call out to religious leaders to really take this seriously, that young people didn't need to be allured and attracted to some confusing thing, but that really there was a search and a deep yearning for an authentic connection with something profoundly moving. And I think that to me that's what this is about. The teachings of Jesus and the Christ, that this sense of I love the concept of Emmanuel, and the hymn O Come Emmanuel. I love that hymn or song at Christmas. But that idea of Emmanuel is the idea of God with us, and to really think about having a God that is really with us right there in the most profound moments of our lives is something transformative. That and I think that how do we share that? Well, I guess I really liked what, Chris, you brought out in your healing story about how in the story of Acts, they just said, I'll give you what I have, and that's all I can give you, but I'll give you of what I have. And I love that idea, that we're only asked to give what we've been given, and that it's really the job of knowing what God has given us and knowing what it means to have God with us, that's what allows us to enable to give to others, and that we can share with others.
Yeah, and for me, I just kept on giving that spirit of the Christmas. Like I just kept on, and maybe it was just in a few words of Merry Christmas, but I felt the presence of the Christ, and I knew the presence of the Christ, and I knew that was providing safety and protection for everyone on that ski mountain, on that ski hill that day, and really it was so much bigger than just me in that little moment. It was really a great sense of concord. It was a great sense of harmony. Everything was very connected and coming together, and the presence of God, the Emmanuel, that was very, very clear. I felt that so near. It was just a wonderful experience.
While Ariana was talking, I was thinking about what I've done to share the Christ on campus. And what I was thinking about was, like, if to me the Christ is that sense of personal love, then the best thing I've done to share the Christ on campus is sharing that sense of infinite capacity to the people that I'm teaching. So, like in the labs and recitations that I'm teaching, I feel like the best thing I can do is to see them as they really are. To see all of them as having an infinite capacity to do anything. And so as I was in lab and like wandering around, like helping people out or doing nothing, because most of the time they were like right on the ball and I was just wandering around helping as I could. I would make it my goal to, as I passed people, to like focus on each of them individually and see what was true about them, and just like revel in how amazing each of them were, because they were all so awesome. And I mean, I don't know that I don't obviously I didn't come across as like I wasn't verbally sharing the Christ message with any of them, but for me to see them as all perfect children of God was how I feel I shared the Christ message on campus this term.
That's great. Well, one of the questions that came in, and I'm going to start working in the questions, but I'll just warn you that I'm going to take the liberty to add a question onto kind of the end of each of these questions, because I really want it to be focused not just on the impact that it has on us, but also thinking that these ideas have on us, but really thinking about also, sharing what we're talking about with others, because, with these CSO webinars, it's not just limited to how Christian Science has an impact on us, but also, how we're sharing it and explaining it to others. So somebody wrote in after I think the last question said, could you, I had mentioned kind of the nature of God and Jesus presenting a radically different concept of the nature of God. And so somebody asked, can you explain the nature of God? And I'm going to add onto it if anybody has any examples of how they have explained their concept to God to somebody else. And I'll just jump in while you guys are thinking about that, because I've had a little bit more time to think about this question as it came in just a couple of minutes ago. But I was sitting in a car with somebody, with a friend who's not a Christian Scientist, who we were just, I forgot how we got in this conversation, but she really wanted to share this idea that she had with me that she had really felt strongly about her whole life, but I think others that she had told this to had been very skeptical. So it actually took her a long time to like get this idea out, but it was basically came down to how she felt, even though, I mean, she had grown up and she said, as I was growing up, my family never really lacked anything, but she says now as an adult, I just don't feel like, the good in my life is dependent on my salary or the amount of money I make. And she said, a lot of people around me are so worried about, you have to save up and you never know what's going to happen and, disaster could strike or you could lose your job, you could lose everything. And she's like, I've never really felt that, but it's not because I've never lacked anything. I just feel this deeper sense of like, if a need comes up, it's going to be met. And I can't really explain how I have this feeling, but it's just this confidence that I have that my needs will be met and, the needs of my family. And I said, well, so we got into a conversation. She knows I'm a Christian Scientist. And, I said, in Christian Science, kind of our concept of God is the source of all good coming into our lives, and not just the lives of Christian Scientists, but every single person. God is the source of unlimited good that is always there, that we can always tap into. And I said, what you're feeling, this sense of confidence, I said, it's really funny because that sounds like totally like something a Christian Scientist would say. And, and of course, like, because all of us can rely on this unlimited supply of good that is coming into our lives. And God knows exactly what we need, and knows exactly how to meet those needs. And sometimes, we try and outline and think, oh, the solution is X, or I need Y in order to be happy or satisfied, or, to pay this bill. But, sometimes God supplies our needs in ways that we're not even expecting. So, I said the most important thing is just to stay true to that confidence, and, that every need is going to be met, but just remain open to how God brings that good into your life. So it was an interesting conversation.
Ari, I like that, and it was similar to what I was going to say in response to the nature of God. And I would just add that for me, it's the good that is unopposed. It's a good that has no opposition. It's a good that's not in a sense of dualism with evil, but really a good that is more powerful and all powerful, that transcends sort of the push and pull of human life and material life. And I think that presence of that all powerful good is what God is, and we see it in so many ways, but we don't always recognize it, I think, in the world. And I guess one of the ways that I've shared that with people, and the most recent instance was just a funny one. I often go to the synonyms of God as ways to describe different aspects of God in Christian Science to others. But recently I was doing sort of a Christmas crafting event with one of my children, and over in the corner, a woman I knew started to say to one of the kids at the table, oh, well, that's an expression of divine love. That just represents divine love in so many great ways. And I was so surprised, and I went over to her and I said, what do you mean by divine love? And and she kind of said, oh, just that all sense of love that's all good. And we got in a conversation about how that's a term we use in Christian Science for God and to understand the presence of God. And she was so interested to know that, that Christian Science included that concept. And so, that was, I think, the first time it came from someone else. But I think just relating those ideas of God to others, that sense of goodness, and then the different aspects of God and the way that we see it manifest through the synonyms has been helpful for me in talking with others.
Thanks for sharing that. So one of the other questions was, how do you share when you feel like you don't have anything to share, or you're afraid that what you have won't be good enough? So I don't know if anybody has felt that way before, like somebody's asked a question, you didn't know how to respond, or you didn't know what to say, or you were worried that maybe your response or your explanation wouldn't be good enough.
I definitely have felt this a lot. Especially like Wednesday night testimonies, and it's like Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday, and so I always feel kind of bad when I don't have something to share. I'm like, I have so much to be thankful for, and I just don't know how to put it into words. And I am not an English major at all. Like, I'm not good with constructing words into like full functioning sentences that like clarify the point I'm trying to make. And so I'm a dancer and I'm an artist, so like I definitely enjoy expressing myself that way. But at a testimony meeting, you can't exactly like get up and start dancing in the middle of the testimony meeting. So just trying to find words to like express thankfulness and gratitude, and like especially my freshman year. I'm a sophomore now, but my freshman year, a lot of discussions came up about like religion, and you'd start talking, and people, especially with Christian Science, they would get confused, and it was very hard for me because I'm still learning and growing in Christian Science, that sometimes the answers wouldn't always be clear, and I wouldn't be able to explain it how I felt that they would understand it without just completely closing the door on Christian Science and like ignoring what I was saying after that. And so like sometimes I'd just be like, I'm not sure about that, but I will like pray about it and get back to you. And so I definitely think prayer is the answer whenever you can't think of the right words to say.
I've just got one really quick story. It's not like a success story, but more of like, I should have done better story. I was a trainer for Peace Corps a few years ago, and I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, and when you're a volunteer, you have to do all the like medical steps and take malaria stuff and things like that. But as a trainer, that wasn't really required. So I wasn't following that sort of thing. But I just really wanted to, I definitely did not advertise that. But I also did not. I wasn't very like upfront about being a Christian Scientist or anything like that. I kind of skirted the issue. If something along those lines came up. And I did it as kind of like, it's better because I'm protecting, myself and, from a lot of like human opinion and things like that. But eventually I kind of realized that maybe it was just fear. And it was at a time in my life where I didn't feel super confident about getting into jumping into conversations about Christian Science with others and with people. And, as in my mind, I was like, well, people are going to get freaked out by it or they won't understand. And so I was definitely flying under the radar about that. And but then towards the end of my stint there, somehow, I don't even remember how this came up, but one of my trainees brought up Mary Baker Eddy. Like, she had actually done a paper in college about Mary Baker Eddy in like a women's history course or something. And so at that point I mentioned as a Christian Scientist. And this was literally like the last day before I was about to leave the country and the training was over and things like that. And she was like, we've spent 3 months together for this training, and I never knew you were a Christian Scientist. Like, I would have had so many questions for you, because she's like, I did this paper about Mary Baker Eddy, and she just sounds like such an awesome woman, and it would have been really cool to talk to you about it. And we talked a little bit about it, but it was just, I think it was kind of a wake-up call for me about just, not to give into just those fears and the doubts that we have that keep us from, taking that first step and being open about like who we are, what we believe. That may lead to people asking questions. And, I just kind of realized that, there may be some questions that come up that, I don't feel 100% confident answering. But, if you always just kind of start with you can always speak from your own experience. And if, that's all you do is speak from your own experience without feeling like I have to have the perfect answer for every single question, that helps eliminate some of the fear. But that experience was definitely a reminder to me. It was a really strong lesson of just the importance of not letting that fear kind of stifle, conversation about it.
Yeah, and Heather in our chat roll brought up the fact that Mrs. Eddy, in her textbook, Science and Health, she talks about how when the heart speaks to those who have hearts, that it's acceptable always to those who have hearts, and then also this idea of the action speaks louder than words. So thanks, Heather, for sharing those ideas in our chat roll. And yeah, also thanks to everyone else in our chat roll. There's a good conversation going on. So Ariana, is there another question that we could bring into the discussion?
Yeah, there's a couple more. So the question, as stated, is for anyone else, what are some of the healings that you guys, what are some other healings that you guys have experienced? And I'm just going to add to that. Have you ever shared a healing with somebody, with a friend or somebody who's not a Christian Scientist?
Yeah, actually, I have one that sort of relates to the last question, too, that I feel pretty comfortable sharing with everybody just because it seems pretty, like, universal. Well, anyway, so when I was little, I was incredibly shy, like, way shy, couldn't talk to anybody. I would have my sister talk, like, she would order my food for me because I didn't like talking to people that, like, looked them in the eyes or anything. And it wasn't until, like, high school, well, around high school, it got to be a problem because I felt like I was incapable of doing anything. Like nothing I shared was good enough. Everything I did was not very good. Like I just couldn't talk. I mean, I was pretty good at school and whatnot, but I just could not interact with people at all. And at some point, and this is like brief version of this, but at some point I realized that what I was doing was I was forcing people in being shy. Being shy itself was kind of selfish because I was forcing people to make me feel comfortable instead of going out of my way to make sure that other people felt comfortable. And especially since I was a Christian Scientist and I knew because, Bible and Science and Health told me that I am loved, and the people around me may not have that, may not have like a family telling them they're loved or like friends telling them they're loved. Or, God is always telling us we're loved. So just once I decided that I was going to make it my goal to make sure that everybody I was interacting with, I was seeing them as loved. And it wasn't, I already knew that I was, I mean, the problem was that I didn't feel like I was loved. But once I was like deciding to make sure that I saw everybody else's love, and interacting with them that way, it just totally went away, basically. It's been like a long journey, but I have no problems interacting with people now. Anyway, that's my story.
Nice.
I've kind of been having to speak about Christian Science a little bit more than I expected lately. I'm a senior in college, so the constant question is, what are your plans after college? And the fact that I'm not freaking out like everyone else is kind of like, Katie, why aren't you freaking out? And it's kind of come to the fact that I tell people, you know, everything in my life has always worked out previously, and kind of saying that's a little weird without giving it a little bit of context and saying, well, because I have this awesome thing that where I know God's on my side. And so explain that to people in a way that doesn't sound ignorant or like saying it in a way that doesn't sound like you're denying the fact that there is an actual fear and anxiety with graduating. It's hard to do. It's hard to tell people, oh, everything will be okay. Like, God's on my side. We're done with that. Like move on. So sharing Christian Science and just being able to say, like, sharing it in that context with my friends, I think has been, when they see that I'm calm about it, I think that like you said earlier, actions do speak louder than words. So it's a piece about it speaks more and makes more sense to people than trying to explain the nitty-gritty of it. So that's one of the ways that in the past couple of weeks I've been able to share Christian Science in a way that is visible in the way I interact with people, rather than trying to put words to this sense of calm.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
That was great, a great story. I was just thinking about a time when I was camping with a friend of mine who was a family practice doctor. Our kids were friends, and so we were on this camp out together a few years ago. And she knew I was a Christian Scientist, and I was just thinking, as you all were sharing about, you know, it seems like, you know, as we're really living it for ourselves and just sharing it naturally about our own experience, that people sort of learn we're a Christian Scientist and then will ask us, why aren't you freaking out? You know, why are you dealing with this differently? And that was what happened on this camp out, basically, that my friend and I were cooking breakfast over a camp stove one morning, and we had a cast iron pan that had been cooking something, and the handle had been turned over the other burner for about 15 minutes or 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And my friend didn't realize it, and she came over and grabbed the pan from the handle that had been over the fire to go move it, and then screamed in pain, dropped the pan, and immediately, in a matter of a millisecond, you know, this came out of her mouth, oh my gosh, I burned my hand, it's gonna, you know, be painful all week, it's gonna blister, it's gonna peel, it's gonna be horrible, you know, this whole litany of like what was gonna happen to her. And I didn't say anything at all at that point. I just cleaned it up and said, oh, here, let's, you know, we had to get going, so I sort of helped clean up, and I just kind of, like we were talking about earlier, just saw her, you know, rightly, just with love, and knew that she was loved and that this didn't have to be the way things would go. But I was just thinking that in my thought, and I hadn't said anything yet. And then as we were walking out of the campground, she just looked at me and she goes, you know, I know you're a Christian Scientist. She goes, what would you do if you had just burned your hand like that? Like, what would you do? And I just shared with her, you know, really simple thoughts, like, well, I would just turn my thought around and I would just remove the whole experience from my thinking and would respond to how, you know, where my thought was going, and something very simple like that. And she just kind of said, oh, interesting. And that was the extent of it, and we sort of moved on. And we didn't talk more about it, but then a week later, I get an email from her, and she says, I just wanted to let you know, she said, after you said that about how you would deal with it, I thought about it, and I tried to do that, to just totally erase the whole experience from my thinking. And she goes, and it just disappeared. She goes, it didn't blister, it didn't peel, no new skin had to form, it just vanished. She goes, I'd never had that happen before. And, you know, she was just so grateful. And, you know, so I think it's just, those experiences like that are really meaningful to me, when, you know, there's just a connection that God is creating, so that we don't have to feel responsible for saying the right thing or doing the right thing, because, you know, God is bringing those hearts together to help each other, and it's really God doing the communication, not a person anyway, so we can just trust that communication from God.
Excellent. That's a great last story to wrap up this chat. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. I was just looking at kind of like a summary of the discussion, the questions that have been coming in through the chat roll, including one person who just shared a healing of cancer. So you can definitely check that out in the chat roll. But I'm just going to ask all of you who have logged in and joined us just to continue thinking about these ideas. Yes, obviously this is the Christmas season, but you know, as we've been talking about, the impact of Jesus's message is felt today and on a daily basis. And so, you know, with that comes kind of a responsibility for each one of us to really think about and deepen our own understanding of what this Christ message is, the impact that it has on the world today, and just thinking about ways of sharing it with others as a way to help others get this sense of just their own unlimited nature and the impact of God in their lives on a daily basis, on an ongoing basis. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks to the CSO rep team for the ideas that you all shared, and thank you, Laurie, for joining us. Have a Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thanks. Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.